Thank you very much, with the Rabbi's permission, and thank you also to Emet for this chance to come and study with you and teach you how to speak English. The subject that I was asked to speak about is happiness in a sad world. The world around us is sad, in case you hadn't noticed. So how do we approach that challenge? If it is an obligation to be happy, how do we do that? But with your permission, I'd like to make this a little bit broader and speak about a theme in Jewish life that raises this question, and see if we can think it through together. And I think you'll find that there's a very deep element here, and also something practical. Can you hear me? Is that okay? You don't want to sit here someplace? You okay? You good? So let's talk about the central work of happiness in Judaism, and that really is Chagim, festivals. Right? You have a mitzvah to be happy on a festival, the Samachta b'chagecha. So let's use that as a focus and ask a question, which is why on Yomim Tovim, festivals, Chagim, you are obliged to be happy, and on Shabbat you have a completely different mindset. Right? We have Shabbos and Yom Tov. Are you Ashkenazi or Sephardi? Both. Sephardi. Hi Ronnie, how are you? Nice to see you. So we'll mix it, I suppose. You have Shabbos and Yom Tov, Shabbat and Chagim, and they're two different headspaces, even though there's an overlap, even though Shabbat is regarded as the first of the Moadim, the festivals, and festivals also have a Shabbat element, and you find the Torah refers to both of them in both terms. Nevertheless, you have a different headspace or mindset on those two occasions. On Shabbos, on Shabbat, the work is menucha, rest. Thank you. Thank you very much. The work is to rest. Whereas on a Yom Tov, a festival, the work is to be happy. And I'd like to investigate with you tonight why there is that difference in spiritual work. Completely different being in the moment, different modes of being, and that is the tension between rest on, even though there is somewhat of a resting on a festival as well, we do desist from many of the activities that we desist from on Shabbos, and even though there is an idea of rejoicing or being happy on Shabbos, but really these are two primary different modes. Shabbos is resting, menucha, and Yom Tov is joy. Is that okay? Can we do that? And this, I think, will give us an opportunity to study a deep insight into what happiness really is, and most particularly happiness in a very difficult world. So what I'm going to try to do is examine Shabbos. Let's look at Shabbat, ask some questions about it, try to gain an insight into what Shabbos is, and then we'll ask some questions about happiness, try to understand that as deeply as we can, and then see how these are represented in these two different nodes of Jewish life, and how they're tied together to a cycle of time that we move through. So let's think together. This will take a little bit of concentration, but I think the rewards will be ample. Let's ask a few questions about Shabbos. First of all, why do we need it every week? You know that we have fundamental messages in Judaism, and apparently once a year is good enough for them. What's more important than celebrating being carved out as that unique people that carries that Torah through the triumphs and traumas of history to that cosmic destination? That's Pesach, where we were defined and became a unique nation. And we put our minds into the most intense of educational experiences to give that message over to our children. Once a year is good enough for that. What's more important to Jews than the Torah? Once a year we celebrate receiving the Torah. So evidently once a year is good enough to get the most fundamental of messages into our consciousness. Shabbos you cannot go more than 6 days without re-experiencing, suggesting that it's far more important than any other message in Judaism. Why? Another question. The punishment for infraction of Shabbos is very serious. Breaking Shabbat is a life and death question. Why? Incidentally, breaking festival laws is not as serious. Not as serious. So why is breaking Shabbos a life and death question? What is, would suggest to us that in some way, Shabbat is worth more than life. I know there's doctors present and they're going to tell me that we break Shabbat to save life. That's true. But the same sources that tell us that we break Shabbos to save a life, the Gemara begins that by saying, you know why we break Shabbos to save a life? So this person can keep Shabbos in the future. Very interesting. So there's a dimension in which Shabbat is worth more than life itself. Why? Another question. We keep Shabbos by not doing things. That's a little bizarre. The way you keep Shabbos is simply by not doing. Technically speaking, you can do nothing all Shabbos. You can drool into your pillow in a coma, like some teenagers like to do, for hours. And technically speaking, you kept Shabbos. Why? The problem is that we have a notion that Shabbat is a temple in time. Are you familiar with that idea? According to Kabbalah, are we allowed to mention Kabbalah in Queens?
Yeah, but not Serenity.
According to Kabbalah, Shabbos there are three dimensions to the world: space, time, and spirit. Space, time, and the soul, spirit, which is neither space nor time. And in all three dimensions, there's a center of holiness, a temple, so to speak. In space, that's in Yerushalayim. And in time, it's called Shabbos. That's why you should conduct yourself on Shabbat as you conduct yourself in a temple. Special clothing, you're not allowed to run, you should speak in a special way. It's like being in a holy space. Now, temples are built by activity, not by not doing things. You want to build a Beis HaMikdash, you have to construct. And Shabbos we do, amazingly, we keep Shabbos by doing those very creative activities by not doing the same creative activities that were done to build the temple. The way the Mishkan was built, you're familiar with this. The way the Mishkan was built required 39 particular creative activities: planting seeds, writing, cutting things to size, dyeing things. It's those particular 39 creative activities which, according to Kabbalah, are the same modes that we use to create the world. The Mishkan is a microcosm of the universe. The same things that are used to create the Mishkan are the things you don't do on Shabbat. Well, now the question is, how do you achieve the building of a structure by not doing? Another question is, why are non-Jews not allowed to keep Shabbat? Non-Jews can do any mitzvah in the Torah and they get reward. Sukkah, for example. On the contrary, Sukkah is a mitzvah with a unique connection to the non-Jewish world in many ways. Not our subject now. And non-Jews can do it. But Shabbat, absolutely not. What is so different and unique about Shabbos? Why is it out of sync with the non-Jewish soul in a way that makes it utterly forbidden? The Rambam, a very serious prohibition. Incidentally, there's another mitzvah that non-Jews are not allowed to do, which is what? Well, it's traditional not to have non-Jews at a Pesach Seder because that is celebrating our uniqueness, true, but it's not a prohibition. Learning Torah. Two things non-Jews cannot do with very serious consequences. Learning Torah, of course a person converting needs to prepare by learning. Shabbat, by the way, a non-Jew has to break Shabbat deliberately when they're converting. So the question here is, why are non-Jews not allowed to keep Shabbat or learn Torah? Which raises another question: what's the commonality between Shabbos and Torah? There's got to be a commonality. Again, there are two unique mitzvahs that non-Jews cannot do that suggest they have a connection. Here's a more sophisticated question that Moshe Shapiro used to ask. The word Shabbat means to sit. It means other things too. It means a return. It has many overtones. But one of the meanings of Shabbat is to sit down. And in case you think I'm putting too fine a point on it, the Torah actually says, Shvu ish tachtav, sit down on Shabbos. In fact, the law is you cannot travel. If you caught outdoors beyond city limits when the sun goes down on Friday, you're frozen in space. You cannot move at all. It's a position of stasis and no movement. Sitting. And the problem is, sitting is always sad. Sitting is the ultimate sadness. It's a position of mourning. We sit shiva. Sitting is, the Maharal explains that the reason sitting is sad is because life is about a journey. Show me another nation that calls its body of jurisprudence halacha, walking. Jewish law is called walking. The idea is it's a progression. And therefore life is for growth and development. And so sitting is sad. And so the death position is the static position of sitting. And therefore, why are we calling Shabbos by a name that is a name of non-progression and sadness? And if you have a sensitive ear, you will ask the question, why is a place of Torah study called a yeshiva? A place where you sit. Now, when you study Torah, it's irrelevant if you sit or stand. The Gemara says that people used to stand out of respect when they learn. Today we're weak, so we sit. But it's irrelevant to the activity. We Jews never name things in a inadvertent fashion. Every nuance of Jewish expression has depth and is specific. If a place of Torah study is called a yeshiva, it is called a Beis HaMedrash and other things too. But for many centuries, the Jews have always called a place of Torah study a yeshiva, which is first of all irrelevant to the activity, and secondly, it's sad. There's no ecstasy of progress like learning Torah. And yet we call it a place where you go to sit. Once again, a commonality between Shabbos and Torah. And both of them problematic and sad. You hear the question? Someone? Anyone? Somebody? These are some of the questions. No doubt we could ask many others. But these are some introductory questions about Shabbos that should stimulate some thought. So here's the correct approach. I think here's a much deeper approach. By the way, Shabbos is not a weekend. A weekend? People think Shabbos is all except the Jews because psychologically it's good to have time to chill and to recharge the batteries and renew relationships and all that. That's fringe stuff. By the way, it's important. If you're involved in Jewish outreach, which I'm sure you all are, so when you teach new people and you teach them about Shabbos, which is the cornerstone of what it is to be Jewish, I'm sure you teach them that Shabbos is a fantastic psychological and relationship tool. It's worth it alone for that. I would say to people coming in for the first time, Shabbos is worth taking seriously even if you're not spiritual at all, even before you think about God. Because it's essential. We live lives of such frenetic activity. Where's there any time for simply communing with who you are? Or renewing marriage? Let me embarrass you. Raise your hand, please, if you live in a family that has dinner together every night of the week. 3 people in the audience? 3 people? We were raised in a world. You didn't have dinner at night till the whole family was home. Maybe not breakfast, maybe not lunch, but it was unthinkable. Today people pass like ships in the night. Right? And therefore, I asked a group of British businessmen recently, 100 men in the room, who has dinner every night with their family? One hand goes up. And he's an old guy who lives alone with his wife. If he doesn't wait for her, he doesn't get dinner. So that is terrible. That is terrible. Where's the time for relationship? Shabbos is amazing. You can sit there, gentlemen, and look into your wife's eyes over the candles and remind yourself of her name. Before you fall asleep with your nose in the soup. Shabbos is amazing for that. And we need it desperately in this era. But that's not the depth of Shabbos. That may be psychological and fringe benefits. Here's the depth. The depth is that every journey is given meaning by its destination. Every process is given meaning by the result of the process. Any journey that doesn't go someplace is ridiculous. It's true the Buddhists will tell you that the journey is the destination. It's a very deep idea, not to be thought about there. But there is a destination. A journey is a paradox, there's a contradiction in terms if you're on a journey that's going nowhere. I would call that lost. A journey has meaning because of destination. And every step of the journey must lead to destination. If you have a process that goes nowhere, imagine you visit a famous inventor. You walk into his lab, and on his workbench you see an incredibly complicated looking machine. You say to him, what does this machine do? He says, this is a breakthrough in human technology. This machine, you switch it on, it keeps itself going, it oils itself, it fuels itself, and if it breaks, it fixes itself. You say, that is astounding. What does your machine actually do? He says, this machine keeps itself going, it cleans itself, and it fixes itself. You say, I know, but what does it do? He says, no, you don't get the point. This machine keeps itself going. The man's an idiot. He's a brilliant idiot, but he's an idiot. If that machine makes you a pizza and does all that, it's a clever machine. But a machine that only keeps itself going is ridiculous. And most people live that way. Most people keep going to work to keep surviving, to keep going to work to keep surviving. For what? For a few days at the end of the year where they collapse unconscious on a beach someplace so they can do it again. And if you ask them why you're doing this, they'll tell you, because eventually I'll have enough. Believe me, by then your arthritis will be so bad. That's a travesty of human existence. There's got to be a reason. There's got to be a destination. There's got to be an endpoint that gives meaning to the journey. Can you hold the questions? And therefore, if you're running a business, if the business is meant to make money, then everything you do has to make money, even when you're spending money. Otherwise, you're running the business irresponsibly. And therefore, every process goes to a destination. Every journey is given meaning by the destination. Every step of the journey and every deviation and every strategy makes sense only when you see when the destination is. There's nothing more important than that. When you're on a journey, everything's negotiable. Fast, slow, the scenic route, the expensive, the cheap, the first class, but destination, never negotiable. There's one thing you can never afford to forget on a journey, and that's where it's going. And Shabbos, our vision of life is that it's a journey to a destination. Our vision, in the biggest view of life, is that it's a journey against resistance to a destination. We call that Olam Haba. We call it the world to come. I'm not talking about the Messianic era that needs detailed explanation. But in general, the life goes someplace. Nothing more important to remember than that. And the older you get, the faster it happens. And the journey can never be, you can never hold on to a moment of the journey. The most important moments in life are the ones that go the fastest. I'm not trying to depress you, but not too many people here have been here 150 years. All you can ever extract out of life is what the ephemeral moment yields and what you hold on to. That's all you can ever have, is what you export into eternity. The Chavetz Chaim put it like this. He said, imagine a man who is shipwrecked, cast about in the waves, almost drowns, and eventually crawls up naked and gasping and dripping on a beach. And as he lies there trying to catch his breath, he sees a group of people walking down the beach. They start bowing down to him. They lift him up, they put royal robes on him, they take him to a palace, they put him on a throne, whatever he says they do. Unbelievable, he rules the island. After a few months, he thinks to himself, this has to mean something. Takes one of his trusted advisors into a secret room, and he says to him, what does this mean? The man says, good that you asked. This happens here every year. Every year when someone's washed up on the beach, we make him king. He says, what happens at the end of the year? He said, well, long faces, we walk into his room, we strip him off of his robes, we take him down to the beach, we put him in a little boat, we push him off, we wait for the next one. He said, what should I do? The man says, if I were you, I'd start exporting to the mainland. Start sending everything of value to the mainland. When that sad day comes, he puts you in the little boat, you'll start rowing and your heart will be singing. And sure enough, he does. Everything he can, he exports. And the sad day comes, they tears in their eyes, they watch it, they put him in a little boat, they push him off, and his heart is singing. Said the Chavetz Chaim, that's you. You were washed up on the beach, a little naked and dripping and gasping thing. And they started doing and eyeing over you and doing whatever you wanted, taking care of you. If you have any sense, some point you'll take the trusted advisor of your seichel into your inner zone and ask him, and he'll tell you it doesn't last forever. Sooner or later, with long faces, they're going to put you in a little wooden... What's the strategy? Export. You can export everything can be exported. When that day comes, your heart will be singing. But our vision of life is that it goes to that destination. And therefore, every other message in Jewish life, once a year is good enough. But destination, the fact that you're going someplace which is an endpoint that gives meaning to the journey, that you can never afford to forget. And that's the secret of Shabbos. Let's answer the questions. Why do you read every 6 days? Because there's one thing you can never afford to forget, that this journey goes someplace. Why is Shabbos kept by not doing? Because you're practicing entering a zone in which you can no longer do. This life is where you construct. The next world is you move with the momentum that you built up here. Like the Chazal say, if you don't take supplies on an ocean voyage out there, you don't have it. If you don't cook before Shabbos, you don't have the food on Shabbos. If you didn't prepare and develop and build and create during this life, when you get in that dimension, all you have in that dimension is the yield, is the produce, is what you produced, is what you created. All the raw material is stripped away. All you're left with is the accrued investment. So our concept is that life is an arduous journey towards a destination, and the destination is nothing other than the work you've put in. And therefore, that is a world, as the Gemara says, the ecstasy of the next world is experiencing it. The agony is not being able to do anything in that world. And therefore, every time of Shabbos, Friday afternoon, when the sun goes down, you enter a zone of simply being. You enter a zone where you simply, the week is for becoming and Shabbos is simply for being. The reason you're not allowed to create anything on Shabbos is because you're experiencing a premonition of another world in which you no longer be able to construct. It sounds a little weird, but you are practicing dying. Even the Mekubalim explain that when the sun goes down on Friday night, there's a law in Shabbos that what happens on Shabbat is determined what happens at the moment the sun goes down. There's a law of muktzah. Muktzah is that things that you're not allowed to move on Shabbos. What defines a thing as muktzah is not what it is, but what it is that the moment the sun goes down. At that moment it freezes. Right? If you've got, for example, let's say candlesticks, right, on a surface that's called a basis, right, a basis, and the sun goes down, the object, the support, the base also becomes a muktzah object that you cannot move. Even on Shabbos, if the things are knocked off the table, you still can't move the table. Why? It's no longer, because when the sun went down, it froze. In Kabbalah, there's a teaching that what you are in the next world is what you are in the moment of transition. Not an average of your lifetime. This is incidentally why you can fix everything in the last moment. Again, if I give you a lump of clay, and you have an hour to work with it, and you will go through all sort of explore different shapes and different structures, but at the end it goes into the kiln and it's fired. That's the way it is permanently. It doesn't reflect what you did during the hour. Of course, if you spent all hour making it more and more beautiful, then it's reflected that way. And that's why you can do tshuva in an instant. A person can die in the moment of death. They can do tshuva even without expression of vidui. Needs explanation. And the way you will look in the next world is completely clean. I mean, you may not have much meat on your bones if you didn't spend a life of Torah and mitzvahs, but at least they'll be clean bones. But if you lose your emunah, you lose your faith in the last moment, you lose it all. If that clay goes into the kiln, you scrunch it at the last moment, that's the way it'll be fired. So there's a parallel in everything. The moment of transition, the dimension of non-activity and passivity. And that's why Shabbos is called sitting. Sitting is terribly sad when you should be journeying. When you reach destination, nothing sad about sitting. The point about reaching, that's what you do when you reach destination. You sit down, journeying would be moving away. Sitting is a sadness when you should be moving. But when you reach destination, when you in endpoint, when you reach the dimension of endpoint, then of course you sit. That's the point. This is where you want to be static. Of course, the movement at that point is cosmic. But you personally are sitting down. Shabbos, when Friday night, it's an unburdening as at the end of a journey. You lay down the burden, you've arrived. Why is a yeshiva called a yeshiva? There are only two things you'll ever do in your life that are endpoints in themselves. Everything you ever do is always for something else. It's quite tragic, actually. Why are you studying? To get the exam. Why do you want the exam? To get the degree. Why do you want the degree? To get the job. You're always chasing something else. What do you ever do that is a tachlis, that's an end in itself? And the answer is there are only two things. In mitzvahs, it's called Shabbos, where the mitzvah of Shabbos is simply to be. On Shabbos, you shouldn't even be thinking about what you'll do after. You're not allowed to prepare for anything you do afterwards. It's a dishonor to Shabbos. You need to exist in the moment. On the contrary, this is where all process has led. This doesn't go someplace else. This is endpoint. And therefore, Shabbos is the one single mitzvah that you experience simply as endpoint. And in Torah, it's called learning Torah Lishma. The mitzvah of learning Torah Lishma, I'm talking about learning Lishma, not in learning in order to know what to do. Learning for the pure ecstasy of enjoying Torah. Learning to think how Hashem thinks. There's no joy like that. And the joy of that experience is simply doing it for the sake of doing it. The ecstasy of learning Torah like that is not because you needed to do something else. The joy of learning Torah like that is reveling in the wisdom itself. There's nothing else like that in life. There is one other thing like that in life that applies to humans in general, and that's called playing a game. Think about it. All cultures play games. What is a game by definition? I'm not talking about a game you do to meet people or learn a skill. Playing a game is something that you do simply for the pleasure of doing the thing itself. That's why it's pleasurable. Grown adults can sit around a table and they're going backwards and forwards and up and down and round for 3 hours. Nothing is achieved and it's delicious. Why would you? By the way, there's a worse way of doing this, and that's talking garbage. Talking nonsense. People enjoy talking nonsense, and I hate to admit it, men do it much worse than women. When women talk nonsense to each other, usually a lot of useful information is being exchanged. Men talk garbage. Men can talk about sports statistics from years before that are completely irrelevant. And it's delicious. You know why it's delicious? Because it's irrelevant. You're living in a little bubble that's being enjoyed just because of what it is. You know what's amazing? The Hebrew word for a game is sha'ashua. There are very few Hebrew words like that are doubled roots. Right, like gal gal, which is a wheel, which means the rolling rolls. Sha'ashua is a doubled root. Sha in Hebrew means to turn towards, like when minchas kain lo isha, to turn towards. Sha'ashua means turning towards, they're turning towards. This is why Chazal ask what Hashem is doing with his time, and they answer that he's playing. He plays with the neshamas of the tzaddikim. What does it mean, he plays? What verb would you like to use for a being whose existence is defined within itself? And so games, the meaning of a game, is something that people enjoy exactly because it doesn't have a responsibility to take you beyond. It's simply an existence in endpoint, and it's legitimate sometimes. I have a friend in South Africa who told me one day he saw his kids play Monopoly, American kids play Monopoly. They're playing Monopoly. Friday afternoon he's getting ready for shul, the kids are playing the same game. So he walks over and he says, look kids, you obviously don't understand, you can't play Monopoly all week. The way you play Monopoly is you play till someone's bankrupt and they fall out. Then you play till someone else falls out. Eventually someone has the Monopoly. They said, no, Abba, you don't understand. The way we play Monopoly is when one person's bankrupt, the rest of us get together and we make a gemach. We make a Jewish free loan fund, we lend them money, we set up in business, we carry on playing. See, the dad thinks there's got to be a winner. The kids think we want to play. But that is the true nature of a game. But Shabbos and Torah share, and that's why there are so many connections. The Gemara says that person who's learned is called Shabbat. There are many parallels between Torah and why are non-Jews not allowed to do both? The answer is that in the Yaakov Esav, I'm not talking about the Ishmael nation, I'm talking here about the Yaakov Esav relationship. And the relationship between them is they were twins meant to partner in the work of the world. Esav was meant to master the world and make it a perfect and beautiful place, and Yaakov was meant to take that beauty and connect it to the spiritual source. Esav is the man of the field, he's firstborn and more mighty. He's got the more, in one way, more challenging work of uplifting the world and making it perfect. And Yaakov's job is to connect it to the spiritual world. They should have partnered. So a non-Jew's work in the Yaakov-Esav relationship is to build the world. That's his tachlis, that's his work. Shabbos is when you step out of building the world. He loses his reason for existence if he does that. I'm not talking about Sunday and weekend, he can have a rest. But keeping Shabbos, which means stepping out of the world, to experience a world of higher, that's our work. And therefore, he doesn't belong in Torah Lishma, which is living in endpoint dimension, and he doesn't belong in Shabbos, which is living in endpoint dimension. He belongs in the world. Ask any non-Jew walking past you in the street, what's the purpose of life? They'll probably tell you to make the world a better place. Right, that's their job. But to make the world a better place for something higher, that's our job. That's how we spot. That's why he brought the Torah to the world, which then filters into their world. That is the concept. So, if we together, our vision of Shabbos, apart from all the side benefits, is living in a dimension of another world. It's moving towards destination. The whole week is focused on that. All the preparations, like life, are all preparing for an existence in the dimension of pure existence. And therefore, Shabbos is a coming to rest, a sitting down, an experience of being. To put it brutally, you should come face to face with who you are on Shabbos, as you would be if you left the world. If you're better than you were the week before, Shabbos is delicious. If the week was wasted and you achieved nothing, Shabbos is terrible. The Christians couldn't handle it, they moved to a Sunday. The Muslims changed it to a Friday, they couldn't handle it. If you enter Shabbos and you know better than you were a week before, but you've wasted a week, Shabbos is terrible. Coming to face to face with yourself and there's only an emptiness. But if the week has been building something, Shabbos is delicious. Let's turn to the question of a festival, of Yom Tovim, Yom Tov. Why is that not resting? Why is that joy? Why is that... Are we happy with Shabbos? Are you happy? Amazing. Let's talk about festivals and why the headspace is Yom Tov, and then we'll try to tie them together. To do this, let's ask about happiness. The mode is not coming to rest. The mode is being happy. You have to rejoice. So what is happiness? And then we'll try to see how it's expressed by a festival, by Yom Tov. So let's ask some questions about happiness. The first question is it a mitzvah to be happy? The answer is, there's no formal mitzvah to be happy, but it's certainly something we are enjoined to do. For example, samachta b'chagecha, which is a form of a mitzvah for sure, but we also have broader statements, ivdu es Hashem b'simcha. Right? Which means serve Hashem with joy. How do you do that? And in Chassidus they say that there's work. That means the work is in the joy. So, what is the nature of something that is not a mitzvah but it's an obligation? Another question. How do you achieve happiness in a sad world? You know, We have a folk saying, mitzvah gedolah lios b'simcha tamid, right? It's a mitzvah to be happy always. How can you be happy always? Maybe some of the time, but always? And there's no mistake that it's an obligation. For example, we have a deep halachic obligation, marbim b'simcha, right? In Adar, you have to increase joy. And in Av, you have to reduce joy. Notice the sages don't say increase joy in Adar and increase sadness in Av. It's increase joy and decrease joy. Clearly, you have to be feeling joy all the time, just more or less. Well, how can you feel joy all the time? There's a letter of the Chazon Ish, right? Died in 1954, the Torah giant of his era. He makes a statement that is beyond human comprehension. Someone wrote him a letter. It's in his collected writings, in the Igris, in his personal letters. You look it up. What the question was, I don't know, but obviously somebody wrote to him with some personal difficulties. He makes a statement there that goes beyond human understanding. Here are his words. He says, "Lemishe makir es oir ha'oire shel ha'emes." He had a rich language, but in loose English it is for one who knows what life's all about. Ein etzev ba'olam. There's no sadness in the world. What is he saying? Our great rabbis are not given to vague emotional exaggerations. What do you mean, ein etzev? What about sitting on the floor and mourning for somebody who's died? It's debatable if you have to cry, but you have to mourn. He had the weight of Jewish suffering on his shoulders. He lived through the European destruction. He and his Rebbetzin were childless. What do you mean, ein etzev ba'olam? No sadness in the world. What are you saying? The Torah makes statements about this that are impossible. The Torah goes through 98 Holocaust-type curses that we'll experience, and then Hashem gives the reason. You know why you'll be tortured as Jews throughout history? Because you didn't serve Hashem with joy. Hashem, that's the problem? We weren't happy enough? And to torture us in unspeakable ways because we weren't happy enough? That's the problem? That's what it says. What does that mean? And more practically, how do you achieve happiness in a desperately sad world? How do you raise children to be happy in a world fraught with danger and threat and unpredictable tragedy? How do you do that? Why don't you tell me you'll go out and have something to eat and drink with your friends and forget about all the suffering? Isn't that insensitive? No, you'll go and have some food with your friends and be thinking about all the suffering. Even worse. Raise your hand, please, if you don't know somebody personally suffering unspeakably. Medically, psychologically, socially, financially, maritally. Well, how many people do you have to know like that before it affects your ability to be happy? And you have to be happy always. How do you do that in the midst of tragedy and sadness? The non-Jewish response, by the way, is detachment. How does the non-Jewish world handle this? They drink, or take drugs, or enter the world of entertainment, which is a completely detached world. If they want to have a really good time, they go watch a horror movie. I haven't been to a movie for many, many years. Decades. But I see them all the time because I travel. And you sit there, there's 15 screens, each one's worse than the next. People being killed, cities wiped out, planets exploded, civilizations destroyed, sitting there eating their pretzels, having a wonderful time. Evidently, that dystopia is worthwhile to take you out of your reality. But Judaism is a process of superconscious awareness, not a process of detachment. Well, how will you remain attached to reality and aware of suffering and be happy at all times? And the answer is that happiness is not detachment. Let me give you a more mature definition of happiness and try to prove it to you. Real simcha is the experience of the neshama to doing what it must be doing. When you're moving correctly along a correct road to a correct destination, you will be happy. You will feel the feeling of progression and of development. The onlooker might not know. The onlooker might see a face strained with effort and tears. But when you're producing and building, especially when it's difficult, there's tremendous joy. A mature joy. I don't see too many convinced faces. Imagine you have to build something very important. You've got to work in the sun. You've got to build heavy rocks and logs. It's very important and you have to finish it on time. But what you're building is very important. How do you feel when you see the thing taking shape and you become aware that if you push on at this pace, despite your bleeding hands and your exertions, it'll be finished on time? No question, a surge of joy flows through you. Somebody watching would never guess, but as you achieve and you feel achievement taking place, there's a tremendous joy in this. If you ever worked hard for a professional achievement or an aesthetic, you've worked for a day or for a week or for a month, people get addicted to that. They forget to eat and sleep. Imagine you're an alien Martian. You come down to this planet, you want to know what human life's all about. So you hire an earthling to take you about human society. The first place it takes you is LA Fitness. You put your eye to the keyhole, you see a young fellow stretching springs, picking up weights, he's shaking with exertion, he's pouring with sweat, he's basically in early kidney failure. You would conclude that just out of your range of vision is another earth being standing there with a machine gun, forcing him into this torture. No one's forcing him, he's paying for this experience, and he's loving every moment. And that pain can become addictive. Why? Why do we enjoy the work that yields progress? Let's analyze it. The reason you enjoy the pain of the journey, the difficulty of the journey, is entirely because of anticipation of destination. You're not enjoying the pain, you're enjoying that this is building what it needs to be building. And very often in life it pays not to arrive, it's often just a big disappointment. Very often anticipation is much more pleasurable than arriving. It's anticipation of destination, it's every mile that brings you closer. It's every moment of exertion that's building what you want to build. That's where the joy is. And I can prove it to you very easily. Imagine you building this thing in the sun and it's taking shape and it's delicious. And as you work, you become informed that one moment before completion, it will be completely destroyed. What happens to the pleasure of the building? Here's pain. You're on this journey to this longed for delicious destination, and it's difficult and arduous and bothersome and torturous, but every mile brings you closer and it's just delicious. You suddenly realize you're on the wrong train. What happens to the joy? There's just pain. The reason you enjoy the journey, the reason you enjoy the work, is because you look into destination, and of course, if you have faith in life, a little bit of emunah, you know that every step of difficulty is being exported into eternity. That's how you can be happy, despite the pain. But here's the real problem. Here's the real paradox. When you get to the destination, you know what's pleasurable about it? How hard the journey was. When you get to that mountain peak, it's not the view that you're enjoying, it's what you conquered and risked to get there. The Gemara says you'd rather have one thing you did yourself than 9 that you're given for free. So here's a real paradox. You are working towards a goal. The work is delicious as you anticipate goal. When you get to goal, the goal is delicious because of how much work you put in to get you. Isn't that weird? There's a circle here. You're climbing that mountain and the risk and danger is delicious as you anticipate conquering the result. When you get there, it's how much of yourself you invested. You hold that beautiful aesthetic thing that you spent an hour or a week making. It's not the aesthetic, the beauty that you enjoy. It's how much of yourself is invested in this. So we have a very strange paradox. We have a process in life that we enjoy moving towards destination as we anticipate destination. And when we get there, the destination is pleasurable in proportion to how difficult the journey was. The harder the journey was, the more you feel. And if you're a Jew, you ask the question, what does this reflect? Ramchal tells us that everything you experience in life is reflected from a higher world. He calls it a koach nivdal. Everything in this world is a projection from a more real, less tangible world. The body is projected from a more real, less tangible dimension called the soul, the neshama. It's more real, more important, and less tangible. But everything, every nuance of expression in that soul is reflected on the face and the gestures and the subtleties of expression. You should look at a tree that way. Everything in the world is teaching you about something higher and something deeper. So the question to ask is this. If we are constructed, the psyche is built in such a way that you enjoy moving towards destination and the work is pleasurable, and when you get there, the pleasure is in proportion to the work, what is the teaching about the higher world? And the answer is life. What is our vision of life? Working against resistance towards a destination that is anticipated, which is nothing other than what the work was. The Zohar says that in the world to come, tam ha'etz katam ha'pri. In all these clumsy words I'm trying to put together, it says it in 4 words. In the next world, the taste of the tree is the taste of the fruit. What does that mean? In this world, a tree is a long, woody substance, a process that takes years, and eventually you get a delicious fruit. In the next world, you can walk up to the tree and eat the fruit or the tree, because then you realize the fruit is the tree. The next world is only what this world was, in its version of reward. And therefore, the concept of joy is moving towards destination. And as you move, and you feel progress taking place, and you feel the progression, there's a tremendous expansion of the soul as life expands into that more sophisticated, more mature vision and consciousness of self. You know, is it a mitzvah to be happy? Well, it's not a mitzvah to be happy. It says, Ivdos Hashem b'simcha, serve God with joy. It doesn't say, don't worry, be happy. It says, serve with joy. Had you served, the joy would have been there. When you're working hard correctly to build what only you can build, you'll feel the joy. Why does Hashem punish us? Not because you weren't happy enough, because you didn't work. Had you worked correctly, the joy would have been there. Not a mitzvah to be happy, it's a mitzvah to serve. If you serve correctly and you're doing what only you can do, you'll feel the joy in that. You know, if I may, maybe the rabbi will permit me, just for a moment, let's just think about this on a higher plane. I know this is not realistic. I know most of us just trying to get through the day. But just for a moment to understand where this comes from. People who are correctly spiritually disposed are in joy always. I'll give you an example. Again, this is not realistic for us. But imagine a prophet, a Navi. Nevi'im, Jeremiah, he writes his book of total abject torture, let alone Eicha. Do you know that when he wrote those books of torment, he was feeling joy? How do we know? Because a Navi does not hear Nevuah unless he's in joy. The Rabbi says this. He says, Abraham is about to kill his son Yitzchak. As he's about to cut his throat, he's feeling simcha shel mitzvah, along with the pain of the death of his child. You think he was conflicted? You think Abraham was standing there with conflict? God, why are you doing this to me? He was doing it wholeheartedly. He was doing it with the simcha shel mitzvah. Sfardim, raise your hand, please. The Sfardim have in the Machzor a most beautiful piyut that we Ashkenazim don't have on Yom Kippur. It's the most beautiful. It describes the Akedah, the sacrifice of Isaac, and there's one line that it says about Avram, Ayin b'mar bocha, one eye crying bitterly for the death of his son, v'leiv sameach, and a heart full of joy, fulfilling the mitzvah. Okay, you have to be an Avram for that. But, by the way, the Ralbag brings a proof. You know, nothing moves in Torah without a proof. The Ralbag brings a proof. He's about to cut his son's throat, and as he's about to do it, he hears a voice calling out to him from the higher world. And Navi can't hear that voice if he's distressed. If he's not clear-minded and serene, he can't hear that voice. And you see this everywhere. Jonah, he's in a ship, the ship's breaking up, they're panicking, it's a ridiculous storm, he's asleep in the bottom of the ship. They wake him, aren't you afraid? I'm a Jew. He crossed the ocean before goes back to sleep. Next time you're 35,000 feet above the Atlantic and the wings start flapping badly, try to take a little nap. You don't take a nap, you say Shema, you do tshuva. He's asleep. Because a Navi is a baby in his mother's arms. She can be walking into a gas chamber. It doesn't make any difference to him. You know, my wife and I were close to Simcha Wasserman. One of the great, some of you might have known him, one of the great Torah personalities of the previous generation. And we were very close to him. He was very approachable. Our families were connected. He was a man, the son of Elchanan Wasserman that the Germans killed. He lived a life of unedited tragedy. The Russians tried to kill him when he was 15. In the First World War, they wiped out his wife's family. They shot his father, Elchanan Wasserman. They were childless. And he sparkled with joy. He scintillated with joy. So once my brother-in-law, who was his physician, felt he could ask him personal questions. He was very close and he was very open. He said, how does the Rav manage such joy always? You've lived a life of such tragedy. Rav Simcha looked at him with those amazing blue eyes. And he said, every situation in life that I find myself in, I ask what can be done. Whatever can be done, I do. Whatever cannot be done, I don't worry about. You know what we do? We don't do what should be done, and we worry. But a person of spiritual greatness, he does what can be done. What can't be done, not my problem. It is problem. I feel it, but it's not my job. You know, if you permit me to speak personally, you know, I've chosen a profession which is Jewish outreach, Jewish teaching. It's a totally losing game. Completely. Every Jew we bring in, dozens are lost. You know, I started life in a different profession, and although it may be hard to believe I had academic promise, here's a friend who can testify to that. And I chose something else, and you know, it's a losing game. They think that maybe 50,000 American Jews have been brought in over the last few decades, but 1 million have been lost. We're on a battlefield being shot to pieces, often by our own people. I would have liked to spend my life in it, but the answer is, what's my job? If I'm a medic on the battlefield and my job is to take one more wounded soldier and stop his bleeding, that's my job. There's a war going on, it's his problem. I feel it, but it's not my job. And therefore, when you're doing what it is that you need to be doing, you will feel the joy of achievement, and you can feel it in any circumstance. Again, you need to be mature for that, but you can. Let's talk for a moment about, am I speaking too long? Speak for a moment about depression. Depression, a big problem in our era. What's the cause of depression? I'm not talking about medical and genetic stuff. I'm talking about life depression. Like most men, when they hit 35, they start getting depressed. What's the cause of depression? A life that's going nowhere. A life that's going nowhere. Simcha is a life that's moving. But when the wheels are spinning and the days and weeks and months are going by and you're not moving, you will feel the cold hand of death. Joy is nothing other than life itself. The ecstasy, the deepest pleasure you can possibly feel, is always a heightened sense of being. Even when its nerve endings being stimulated, what is heightened is a sense of the vibrancy of life. You know what's amazing? When we make blessings on food, as the Rav will tell you, you only make a bracha when there's pleasure. If you have a food that's pleasurable, if you drink water, you make no blessing if you're not thirsty. The doctor says drink a glass of water every hour. No bracha, you don't make a blessing. Unless you're thirsty, then water's delicious. But if you're drinking water medically, you don't make a bracha. You only make, it's called bikas hanenin. By the way, if you take a medicine that is flavorsome, you might have to make a bracha, ask the rabbi. Because the bracha is made on the pleasure of the food. It's called bikas hanenin. What's the language of the bracha? Baruch chei ha'elamim. Blessed are you, Hashem, who gives life to the world. That's interesting. You're making a blessing on the pleasure of the food. And what's the substance of the blessing? You give life. The wording of the blessing has to reflect what you're doing. And yet the wording of the blessing is not that you give me pleasure. So listen to what's going on. You make a bracha to Hashem that He sustains you with this food, but you only make the blessing on the pleasure of the food. And the reason is because real life lives in the pleasure. The sensation of being alive is pleasure. That's what it is. There's no greater pleasure. Imagine, you ever been in the ocean carried under the waves where you thought you were going to drown? And suddenly you break the surface and take a breath? That's a breath of pure ecstasy. What are you happy about? You're just alive. Yeah, but you're about not to be. It doesn't last long, by the way. A few minutes later you start getting irritated and bored in the sand, getting a sandwich and you don't like it, but when the patient's terminal and with no hope left and the doctor finally says, I can't believe it, you're cured. The person flies over the trees. What are you so happy about? You're just alive. Yeah, but now you understand it. And therefore, depression is the result of a life. What's the cure for depression? Get moving. You cannot be depressed when you're productive. You can be weeping in pain. You can be sobbing with exertion. But you can't be depressed when you're productive. If you know someone is depressed, get them moving. Best of all, get them doing something for somebody else. You can be sad. When the Chazon said, Ein etzev ba'olam, there's no sadness in the world. Ein etzev, that Hebrew word means depression. Black end of the road, despairing, no place to go. That's never allowed. Sadness, yes. You might have to sit on the floor and empathize with the neshama that has left the world. By the way, how could you be happy while you're mourning, lo aleinu? The answer is, there's a mitzvah to do here. Yeah, it's not our subject, but just as a side point, when you sit on the floor mourning for someone who's died, there's a responsibility. The Rambam makes it clear, this is the rational Rambam, by the way. The Rambam makes it clear that the mitzvah of mourning is to carry the neshama on a journey. This is a parent who's died. That parent carried you. Now they've died. They need you to carry them. The mitzvah of mourning is to act in empathy with the neshama. They can't move, you sit passive. They've got no presentation in the world, yours are torn. They are silent, you sit silently. You act. The Rambam, listen to this. The Rambam rules in the Mishnah Torah that if you fail to mourn for a relative that you're obliged to mourn for, you are guilty of cruelty. Achzarius, that's his word. You could have helped. You could have carried this neshama, and you didn't. So there's work to be done. So how does a person feel like that when they collapse exhausted that night with a wrenching emotion of mourning? They feel the pain and they feel, I did what I had to do today. You have to be mature to understand that as simcha. But nevertheless, that's what it is. And so, by the way, there's one escape from a life that's going nowhere. One other escape. There are only two outs from a life that's going nowhere. One is depression and the other one's worse. The other one is a person who builds something totally insignificant, but with frenetic activity. This person builds muscle, political power, money, a modern art collection, a beer can collection. Doesn't matter what it is. And people, by the way, here's where Jews are different than non-Jews. When a Jewish boy builds a beer can collection, he takes it seriously. He's got every one, and he starts a fan club and a website. Jews know life is serious. And that'll keep you happy for the rest of your days. If you spend your life building the world's greatest modern art collection, what is modern art? The guy throws a can of paint over his shoulder, gets his cat to walk around on the canvas. I don't happen to like modern art either. If you're doing it as an investment, by the way, no problem. Why not? But you're doing it as a life goal? You have every beer can that's ever been. That will keep you happy the rest of your life as you're driven to build and construct, but you have nothing. And therefore, let's close the circle. So here's the thing. Jewish life is a journey. In the cycle of the year, we cycle through time. Every festival, every Yom Tov is another step of the journey. The joy of a festival is the step you've taken on the journey. It's not destination. It's another step and a way station on the, as you enter Pesach. You're stopping, getting off the train and experiencing what it means to become the Jewish people. Absorb that, lifts you, and you move on. A few weeks later, you receive the Torah, and the festivals are called regalim. They're walking. In English, they call them pilgrim festivals. It's a journey. Listen to this definition. Shabbos is a destination. Yom Tov is a station. The simcha of a Yom Tov is you getting off the train as one more step on this journey. And then you move a few weeks later and you move to another step in the journey. You come to a Purim. You know what Purim is? The Jewish people are earmarked for destruction. Genocide. By the way, literal, total, the irony of modern life is that we are the people that they've been targeting with genocide explicitly, desperately trying to kill us all. Purim, there was a Persian decree to kill all Jews on one day. Literal, total genocide. There was no America to run to. You're talking about all Jews on earth to be killed by all non-Jews on one day, men, women, and children. By the way, that was Persia, Iran. And I don't know if you noticed it, but the decree's still in effect and they haven't forgotten. It was never retracted. A king in those days never allowed to retract a decree. He only made a new decree. You have a right to defend yourself. By the way, is that echo in your ears? You Jews have a right to defend yourselves? Well, chutzpah, we have a right to defend ourselves. So that original Persian decree of destruction, Iranian decree, is still in force, and they haven't forgotten. So we are the people targeted with genocide. Now they accuse us, talk about a benafuch. Aren't you ashamed to accuse us of genocide? What are you thinking? The only greater disgrace is that it happened to be South Africa. It's not funny. But you live through that, and here's this genocidal attack on the Jewish people that leads to an acceptance of Torah that is unprecedented. What an amazing experience. So every festival is a way station on the journey. It's called a moed, means moving towards destination. And that's a cycle of Jewish life. Every Yom Tov is another step on the journey. The ecstasy of the Yom Tov, the simcha shel mitzvah, samachta b'chagecha, because the chag is, by the way, related to a word in Hebrew that means a circle. A chug. Chug haaretz is like the equator. But it's a way station, and you get off and you enjoy the relishing of that step of progress. That every festival is not a destination. It's another element in Jewish life. It's Torah, it's self-assessment of tshuva, it's a celebration of the year being born. It's Pesach, where our unique identity as Jews is carved out. By the way, I don't know if you know this, Pesach is where we become Jews. Rosh Hashanah is where we became human. You know, people say you Jews are so sectarian, you care only about yourselves, you only pray for yourself. Somebody said you shouldn't have a non-Jew at your Seder. That's Pesach. But Rosh Hashanah, we don't do that. Rosh Hashanah, we pray for the whole world. Kol ha'olam kuloi, we say. Aguda achas, we're looking forward to a messianic reality where all humans are each playing their role in that symphony. Just as an aside, I can't resist telling you this, most beautiful. The Torah says, why do we say Maloich al kol ha'olam kulo in Rosh Hashanah? We say, Hashem, please rule over the whole world, all of it. Kol ha'olam kulo. Why do we repeat the word kol? We never repeat words unnecessarily. Maloch al kol ha'olam kulo. Why do we say kol twice? He says something beautiful. He says, because if you said kol once, you might mean a majority. In Jewish law, a majority is dispositive. If you're cooking a meat soup and a little milk falls in, it's fine. I mean, don't try that at home. But it's okay. If you have something, if your schach on your sukkah is 51%, it's fine. If something's 51% over the edge, it falls 100%. And therefore, in Jewish law, a majority is as if all. And therefore, when we are saying Hashem rule the whole world, we might mean 51%. And that will be good enough. So in Rosh Hashanah we say Hashem, we don't mean that. We don't mean most of the world. We mean everybody. We mean every Zulu cattle herder, and every Chicago stockbroker, and every Kew Garden Hills teenager painting her nails black. You know. We mean everyone. And therefore we're cycling through everything. A day of consciousness of our part in humanity. A day of consciousness of our unique role, which is Pesach. A day of the expression of that which is called Torah. And it's a journey through the year, or a cycle, or a spiral. And therefore, that's a summary, I would say, of Jewish life. It is the joy of the journey that's manifest as Yom Tov, that's what it is. And then, of course, much more frequent, much more important is that all of these way stations lead to a destination. And that is Shabbos. And so when we get to Shabbos, we feel the ecstasy of the relief of reaching destination, when all the material, all the experience of destination is simply what all those joyous moments have led to. Thank you very much.